They were able to keep their jobs. Bobby Petrino, John Calipari, the list goes on and on and on. But they win, right? There's a lot of good coaches who maybe graduate their players and actually make sure their players are educated. If they don't win, they're shown the door. And I think that goes against the purpose of higher education. And this is something that sadly I did when I worked in intercollegiate athletics. There is an extreme willingness to justify and rationalize poor decisions. I'll give you an example. Oftentimes in intercollegiate athletics we talk about people from low socioeconomic backgrounds or minorities or others who might have, for whatever reason, not had a good leg up in life. And so we rationalize by letting them in school, which I'm not saying we shouldn't do, but then we immediately start playing them. I can think when Ohio State was on the quarter system, you would actually have Maurice Clarett actually played 3 football games before he ever attended a class as a freshman athlete at Ohio State. So we're bringing in these kids who already have academic issues. We're throwing them right into a full-time job, high-stress position where the livelihood of many people depend upon 18 or 19-year-old kids. And we're not doing anything about their education, but yet what we always say, and I did this, and that's why I say we. Like, well, gosh, Maurice Clarett, he'd be back on the streets. He'd be in the world of hurt if we didn't let him play football. Where else would he be? And you start to think that you're actually doing favors for those individuals when really you're not. You're exploiting them for your own personal gain. But you start to rationalize cutting corners and doing those things so you can win. Give you an example. I never ever thought that Jim Tressel was the model coach, ethical coach that everybody made him out to be at Ohio State. But I do believe, and I don't know him, but I do believe that he tried in many ways to do things as correctly as he could. And then he's confronted with a very small thing, really, but it's players, whether you agree that they should be able to do it or not. I happen to think the players should be able to do it, but they were selling, tattoos and getting tattoos, giving away merchandise. For whatever reason, it's against NCAA rules. Jim Tressel lied to the NCAA because he knew if he told the truth about these players, they would be ineligible, they wouldn't be able to compete that season, and at that point in time, they had a chance for the national championship. Jim Tressel rationalized that he was doing the right thing. We tend to do that, unfortunately, in college athletics. Noted scholar in college athletics, Murray Spurber, I think, puts it best. Intercollegiate athletics makes rational people act irrationally. And I think that that's really part of the problem. We make decisions, and again, I'm calling on myself here. We make decisions that we wouldn't normally make in life. But we make decisions based upon the irrationality of we must win, we must generate revenue, and then maybe I can justify it that we're actually doing somebody a favor by letting them play. It's okay if they don't go to class, or we'll write that paper for you, or we'll do something. We'll give you a copy of the test, because that's going to keep you eligible, and that's better for you. I've mentioned the drive for money, and then as a joke I said this was just in the 80s, and I say that because it wasn't just in the 80s. It was in the 70s, it was in the 60s, it's obviously going on now. So here's where I start, and I was telling some of your faculty last night this. Here's what I believe, and I strongly believe this. That I've had numerous debates with very distinguished people who want to defend the current model. My proposal, my baseline is that for any argument about fixing the problems, the very real problems in intercollegiate athletics, is we have to start at the baseline of the current model does not work. We can't try to justify what has not worked for over 100 years. We have to fix the problem, the core issues. And the core issue that has to be fixed before anything else, recruiting, all the other things that are out there, is the relationship between higher education, academia, and intercollegiate athletics. We have to fix that first. And we have to say to ourselves, the current model does not work. We'll continue to spin our wheels, so to speak, if we try to rationalize and say that the current system, or tweaking the current system, is going to help. Now change is coming, all right? We know that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history. Over the past 100 years, and this is just a thumbnail sketch of the groups that have tried significant reform of intercollegiate athletics. Some things have happened that are for the positive, all right? But for the most part, most reform efforts have failed. Certainly the NCAA itself has tried to reform, right? We've mentioned the government, the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics, an independent group that actually has made some great proposals that the NCAA did adopt. But again, it didn't get at the core issue of academic primacy. The Drake Group, of which I'm a member of and was the former executive director of, really has attacked that. We're going to get into that a little more specifically, has attacked that core issue. Once we figure that relationship, many of these other things we talk about, the recruiting issues, coaches' salaries, all those other things, paying players under the table, those things can then be addressed. But we have to address what we want college sports to be first. So now I put the onus on the faculty. Sorry, faculty, I'm not going to let you off on this because I firmly believe that we are at fault, and I put myself in that category. Faculty are responsible for guarding the curriculum at institutions, and we have totally advocated that for athletics at many places. We have abandoned our first responsibility. In fact, when I talk about college athletics reform, I'm really not talking to Jim Delaney of the Big Ten. I'm not talking to Mark Emmert. I want them to listen. I'm not talking to college presidents. I'm talking to the faculty. This is really a family fight when you think about it, because we have abandoned it and have looked the other way when we actually have the power. There are two groups, the faculty and the athletes themselves, that can change this overnight if we want to. All right, so this is what we've done. Faculty, sorry about that. Right? We've wasted. We've misspent our inheritance. We've let others take over our role as guardians of the curriculum to keep intercollegiate athletics academically centered. We were asleep at the switch and we let it happen. Now here's what the NCAA has done in a nutshell, really, over the years to try to address an ever-growing movement about academic issues in intercollegiate athletics. They did realize it's a problem. Groups like the Drake Group and Knight Commission, certainly with the advent of the internet, we've become much more vocal, much more organized, and the NCAA is under pressure to address this academic primacy issue. So they started back really in the late 80s, early 90s by giving control of intercollegiate athletics to the presidents. Now that sounded pretty good on paper. We had a saying in the military that was, that really briefs well. Now how is that going to act in practice? How is that going to play out? And presidential control has not worked because presidents find themselves beholden to so many constituencies. In a recent Knight Commission survey, presidential survey, that I think almost every BCS college president responded to, 90% said, I have no control over this. I have to just somehow kind of keep the tiger at bay. That intercollegiate athletics has overwhelmed their own ability to govern the institution. So that started out and then became a bit of a failure, right? The NCAA recommended fiscal integrity. You can't spend what you don't have. You can't keep spending to try to keep up with the Joneses. I often laugh about the University of Texas, their former athletic director, DeLoss Dodds, when he was asked by a reporter about, you're spending so much money to keep up with the Joneses. And he said, at Texas, we are the Joneses. So, but schools like Ohio University, Marshall, Colorado State, other mid-majors I've worked at, are trying to keep up with the Joneses, and it's something they can't do. And they've sacrificed their academic mission in the process. Something you might be familiar with. The NCAA then came up it's been about 5 or 6 years ago, they came up with what's called the academic progress rate at Division I. In a nutshell, what that means is if you have a team, and let's just take a baseball team, your academic progress rate is determined upon if the athlete is eligible and then is retained, stays from one year to the next, doesn't transfer. and you want to get 2 points. So you want somebody who's eligible and is retained. If a person's eligible and doesn't stay there, you get 1 point. Or if he's not eligible and stays there, you get one point. But you want to get those 2 points. That's extrapolated into a formula based upon the number of athletes at your institution, using a scale of a number of athletes on the team, using a scale of 1,000, and you want to try to get a score of a 925. If you're 925 or greater, you don't get penalized. With me saying that, can anyone see potential problems with a system like that? It's really several. You have a number out there and you're telling people you're going to get punished if you don't meet this number. You see what I'm doing? I'm winking. You kind of get that? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And that's what was happening. The scandal at Auburn, they touted that they had a higher academic progress rate than Yale. And then it turned out that most of their football and basketball players were taking independent studies, and faculty in the room, there was one faculty member who was supervising 130 independent studies in one semester. And he was also chair of his department. Is that possible? Not possible. But because of that, they were able to tout a very high APR. So in other words, this is a curtain. This is a facade. And the NCAA and others, conferences, have been masterful at putting up that curtain. And it's up to us, faculty, to make sure that we pull that curtain back and say, this is what's going on. And this does not mean if you meet this number, and North Carolina has had a high APR. This doesn't mean if you meet this number that you are an institution that is actually grounded in academic integrity. So, potential problems. Obviously, I've talked about that. There were monetary incentives with the APR, which I didn't mention, that you would actually have to pay money if your APR was low. You would lose scholarships or potentially lose postseason appearances. There have been a couple schools that have been punished, which the NCAA has just trumpeted. One being the University of Arizona, where they lost 2 scholarships a few years ago, 2 football scholarships. And the NCAA said, see, we're really cracking down, and Arizona's really, by God, they're going to start making sure their kids are getting educated. What they didn't say was 4 academic advisors were fired at Arizona. Can you imagine that as an academic advisor? That's your job, that's your passion, great people work in that business, and you're being told, you didn't keep this athlete eligible. By the way, here's your pink slip. So that also causes a problem when you're putting pressure on academic advisors to keep athletes eligible. So it really is a curtain that we need